So we want to begin this morning with an acknowledgement. One of these things is not like the others. You're probably playing a little Sesame Street jingle in your head now. Or maybe you're not, I don't know, maybe you didn't have
We actually wanted the jingle.
Yeah, but for copyright reasons, we didn't actually download the jingle because this thing happens, it's happened to us before where we play something copyrighted and then all of our online friends aren't allowed to join us anymore. We get stuck in YouTube or Facebook jail, so just kind of go back there nostalgically in your head, sing the song as we introduce ourselves. Do we want to sit?
Yeah, let's sit.
So, welcome. If you saw any of our social media promotion, then you knew that in Friends fashion, we were calling this one the queer one. So, with that in mind, you're probably already kind of maybe answering that question in your head. You know, one of these things is not like the other. Maybe hearing me say that, maybe you know me a little bit, maybe you know Tommy a little. Maybe you're sort of answering that question, kind of filling in the blank for yourself. But what we want to do this morning, over the course of our time together, is complicate or problematize your assumptions around which one of us is the other, or the one, or whatever. So in order to do that, I'm going to first actually need to introduce myself and my friends up here. I'm David Roberts, one of the pastors here at Watershed. You all probably know that, unless you're new, in which case don't worry about it. It is not consequential. But there's a good chance you might know my friends, one of them in particular, a little bit less. And so I want to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. And to do that, I'm first going to turn things over to my friend Kim.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Good morning. My name is Kim Honeycutt, and I am a psychotherapist and a trauma recovery consultant. And I've been in private practice for over 20 years, and most of that time, I have been in hiding or somehow suppressing my natural sexual orientation. And part of the reason for that is in my late 20s, I was in a relationship with a woman. Most of y'all probably were in a relationship with a woman in your late 20s too, regardless, but I was, and I've never thought being gay was wrong, but it didn't stop wrong things from happening to me from people who did think it was wrong. And so within that relationship, there's a great deal of internalized homophobia, and it was so shame-based, and I was such a secret to this person and to her family, and it became very explosive. And so I left that relationship, and I decided to really just walk away from my sexual orientation. And again, I didn't think it was wrong. I think the best way to explain this, like Blair talked a few weeks ago, gave an incredible talk here. She talked about the woman at the well. And I was, for so many reasons, knew I was so different and was always the person who had to go to the well symbolically at noon. And honestly, I got tired of having to be that person. And so I did whatever I had to do to adapt and to protect myself so that I could go when all the other women were going. And I got so into that world. See, I just wanted to serve God. And I have this amazing God relationship with God that, like, He saved me from alcoholism. He saved my life. He saved me from a horrific eating disorder. And I just wanted to share with other people about this God who had been so good to me. And I knew if people knew my inner truth, that I would be rejected from that and wouldn't be allowed to be who I wanted to be. And honestly, I stayed in the majority of the norm for so long, and I worked a whole lot. I got very involved with my church. I got very into God's Word. And what I wanted to have happen did. Like, I got to go share. People started asking me to go speak at women ministries. I started being asked to go speak at different churches when the pastor was out of town, and I got very involved with my now previous church and was asked to speak whenever the pastor was out of town. And so I got to go, and it's part of how I met your pastor here, Scott, is because he and I shared a stage in 2017. So I got to go share with people how God had rescued me, who God was to me, and it was absolutely wonderful. And then I met this woman. And in 20 years, I hadn't been attracted to anybody. I dated a few guys, and I think I decided I was heterosexual. I just didn't like men. I just didn't want them to touch me, but it worked for a little while. But then I met the most beautiful woman in the whole world, and all of y'all were really attractive. That's great. But I met the most beautiful woman ever, and she was amazing. And so she worked for one of the largest Christian organizations. And so she's a video producer and director. We started talking, and I started coming up with all these reasons to do videos. Baby baptisms. We're both well versed in the Enneagram world. I came up with all these reasons. We started talking, and then it became very evident how I felt about her, and I told her. And we started dating, if you can call that dating during COVID, whatever you want to call that. And so we decided to get married. I was 49 when I met her. I had a relationship for 20 years, and I just knew. And I saw God in her, she saw God in me, and we just went for it. And we got a lot of advice to keep dating and date through each season. I'm almost 50. I'm very seasoned. I don't need to belabor the point. And so we got married last June 12th. And I think we have a picture of our wedding. Yeah. I told you she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And she's here. She's right here on the front row. And I want you to know this is the first time. She's made me really soft, and I'm mad about that. This is the first time from a stage I can introduce my beautiful wife without fear. So, thank you all for that. So, on the way back from our honeymoon, we went to Key West, where everybody's gay, just let you know. It was very safe. It was great. Everybody was gay. And the day we were coming back, we knew we had to tell everybody. But we also knew all the things I'd feared for 20 years, all the reasons I'd gone and hide in the first place would happen to us. And so we set it up the best we could for people to protect. We did it on Facebook, because everything on Facebook is true, right? So we had people protect us the best we could while we were in the airplane, and we just announced it to everybody that we were married. And it was great, and we got received, and it was wonderful. And we also got phone calls, all the keynote speaking engagements I had coming up, everything. I got fired from all of them. And we knew that would happen. And then the church I was in, we stopped feeling safe. We were told that people there didn't want us there. We were told that people left because of us. And so she'd been coming to Watershed at different times. And so we walked in this door, and it was like, it was amazing. And so I really want to acknowledge John Nance and Tommy, and Mark and Ollie and Blair and Jonathan Miller and all the people while I was in hiding were protesting, were fighting for us to have the right to get married, the right for us to have a church like this to walk into. I want y'all to know I'm so grateful. So that's who I am. Peace.
Good thing this is not a competition.
Who said it wasn't a competition? I'm an 8. Everything's a competition. Thank you, Sam. All right.
And I'm a 2, so I'm going to put some love on it. Hey, everybody. My name is Thomas Garvin. Most of you might know me as Tommy Allgood. And then I wasn't expecting to take a lot of space to introduce myself, but you have a lot of new people here. So.
Hi, my
people! So, for y'all that don't know me, I have been attending Watershed for about 6 years. You are seeing pictures of my partner. My pronouns are they and he. I identify as queer, non-binary. And I always like to say I used to say I grew up Jehovah's Witness, and now I've shifted that story a little bit to I grew up at the intersections of Jehovah's Witness, Black Church, and mainline Christianity. So all of that is within me, and so I don't come to this conversation about queer love lightly, because I carry all those stories in me. Where does my blackness end? Where does my queerness begin? Right there, it's all mixed and entwined. And then there's what are the mental health implications for dealing. So I just want to say I don't take for granted that it's Black History Month. It feels like a time of trauma for some. It feels like a time of joy, celebrating Black joy for others. I don't take for granted that there are unspoken power dynamics between gay men and lesbian women, that our different social locations and our experiences and the way that society is currently structured really makes sometimes communing together difficult. I don't take for granted that transphobia is rampant in the LGBTQIA plus community. I don't take for granted that we often miss talking about the experience of those intersex and asexual. I don't take for granted that all of us in this room are broken down, bruised, beaten, tired, exhausted from pandemic life, from demands of capitalism, production, and having to protest to say, I deserve to be here. But hopefully through this conversation, as we're unpacking queer love and our differences, my friend Jonathan helped me to say, maybe we'll answer these questions. Will you include me? Do I matter to you? And can we tolerate these tension between our differences? So that's how I'm coming into the conversation. Really tired, really exhausted, holding a lot of weight. The week's been kind of crappy. I almost said, but you know. So, David, how are you coming into the conversation?
Sure. So, I think multiple times this morning I've told people that they've kind of given the road. Oh, hey, how's it going? And I've had to clarify that good, like my definition of good or normal, is much lower than it was 2 years ago. And so, I think all of us on some level are showing up with a lower baseline or a more, in a certain way, generous threshold for, good enough, More on the identity level, I'm playing the straight man this morning. And I mean that in a few ways, both comedically, thank you for the three of you who laughed at that, but also at the level of identity, my pronouns are he, him, so I'm cis. I'm married to a woman, which doesn't automatically make me straight, crucially, but it happens to be true for me.
I'm trying to push that a little bit, but.
And you can probably barely see me up here because of the way my melanin shows up, and so very reflective.
Or lack thereof.
in my skin tone. So that's how I'm showing up. But I'm also showing up as someone who has been deeply, deeply influenced theologically and intellectually. I'm Enneagram 5, so I say words like theologically and intellectually. And so I've been influenced on that front by queer identity. In the gift, I believe, that queer identity offers all persons and all identities when it comes to undermining things like normativity, what we count as right or normal or proper, in the way that we show up in the world. And so I have a great deal of gratitude towards just the advances made socially, politically, economically, academically by the queer community, those who are identifying as queer at the level of sexuality and gender, because of the ways that has allowed me to even break free from normative assumptions around my own identity, my whiteness, my masculinity, things like that. So that's how I'm showing up. And what we want to do now to kind of transition is to introduce a question that we're all going to sort of answer from our different backgrounds, because in all of the ways that are probably apparent now, we are showing up with a different combination of experiences, narratives, stories, thoughts, levels of expertise, in different backgrounds. And so in more ways than probably even all of us can count this morning, we are having to navigate something that all of us navigate every moment of every single day, which is what does it look like to manage or navigate or tolerate the tension that emerges within our differences. And so to kind of kick that off, I want to turn it over to all of our new friend Kim.
So the depth of this question, and in any relationship, being able to tolerate the tension between differences will tell you how close and how much you can co-regulate with each other. And so I'm going to tell you about the window of tolerance, which is created by Dr. Dan Siegel, but I'm going to give you a personal example first, and I'm going to back into that a little bit so you have all something you can take away for any relationship that you're in. So this is an example within my marriage. So if I'm in a different room and my wife calls out and says, Kim, come here, I stop, drop, and roll. Like I rush in. I'm not myself in the moment. My stress is very, very high. I don't know what to anticipate, and so I have a huge reaction to it. I'm like, honey, what is it? What is it? What's wrong? What's on fire? What's going on? Who do I need to kill? What's going on? And she would say, look at this puppy on TikTok. But what happens to me comes from my old story. My old story is my first story. And that is when my mom called my name from a different room, and I came in, I'd possibly be hit, pre-guaranteed I'd be verbally abused, and something would happen to me in that moment. And so just because time has passed doesn't mean my system doesn't know that story first. And so when I walk in the room, I'm like, what is it? And she tells me that because I know my personal internal map, and she knows her personal internal map. I know what comes in as a threat to me, what gives me a sense of danger, and what it is for her as well. Because I know the differentiation between myself and her, and she does as well, she knows what I'm experiencing. She knows I've left my window of tolerance in that moment, and that she's not responsible for where I am, but she can help me heal because of where I've been. And so we work very hard to speak to each other on behalf of our wounds, not from our wounds. And honestly, if I hadn't waited this long to get married, I wouldn't be able to do this. This took a whole lot of individual work and a lot of individual work for her as well. But the window of tolerance does an excellent job of kind of giving you a framework of understanding where you are. In different topics for you, you're going to have a different depth of your window of tolerance. So my window of tolerance about how I look is about this big. No matter what you say to me, positive, negative, I will go hypo-arouse or hyper-arouse. Hyper-arouse means I go a little more in a fight, flight, or fawn response. Hypo-arouse means I'm going to shut down, and I'm probably going to go either disassociation, I'm going to disappear a little bit. Hyper is I'm going to go into more of a I can and be a little bit more defensive, a little bit more of a fight response with her. All right, so it's just a small window. My window for religion is huge because I know my relationship with God. Wherever you are in yours, there's room for you, there's room for me. And so I'm not most likely going to go hyper-arouse or hypo-arouse in either way. So it's really important that we not buy into this idea of two becoming one. And it's really, you have to know yourself and who you are, and both people in any relationship, if there's going to be any possibility of knowing your wishes, your desires, what comes as a threat for you, what doesn't feel great to you, so that it doesn't become so intermingled with each other, that the fight becomes about anything besides what actually is going on.
So good. So I have a question for you in terms of window of tolerance. It changes based on the context and the situation that we find ourselves in.
Very much.
That makes me think about when I'm thinking about my life and my perspective, my lived experience, this term that I heard called epigenetics. And if you don't know what epigenetics is, it deals with generational trauma and how trauma is passed down from one generation to the next generation. When we think about genetics, is how things are expressed in our bodies. And so basically what the theory says, in the research, there was an experiment done in, if you want more information, I have a podcast called Permission to Be, and we interviewed Dr. Hillary McBride, and she talks about this. But what they did was they exposed mice to cherry blossoms, and then they would deliver a shock to that mice. And so anytime that they were exposed to cherry blossoms after that, they would have a reaction in their body. And so then those mice were bred and they had children. Anytime the children were exposed to the cherry blossom but didn't get the shock, they still had the same fear reaction as their parents, as the mice they came from. And this happened for about 7 generations down. So why am I saying that? Well, again, my identity is as queer and black, and then to understand the position in which we stand, understanding the history in which we come from, right? And so when we think about that and how people might, this week's been really difficult for me.
Please try again.
Thank you, Siri. So thinking about this week, and it's been difficult for me because I've been in situations that have been activating and re-triggering, and especially attached to the social narratives of our current day and age. It makes sense why relationally it's been really hard to stay in my relationships this week. And it looks different for everybody. For me, it looks like a lot of freezing and fawning. I try to accommodate people. For other people, say for instance, a great example of this is a lot of people, when we think about the police and black people, and we go, why are they running? Well, if we think back historically, you didn't have the option of freezing. It meant death. So the only way that you had a chance of survival was to run. These things still come out in our bodies today. And so for background, I'm a nurse as well. And so I've left bedside because that became too triggering for me, but now I'm able to have the knowledge to sort of understand these somatically, what's happening in my body. But I'm curious, how do we kind of regulate or tolerate when we're outside or inside of that window of tolerance?
So it's a great question. So for those who don't know what fawning is a recent term coined by Pete Walker, who's got a great book if you're interested in this. Fawning is what we do as children when, in order to diffuse conflict, we do something to please someone else so that we can feel safe. That left untreated is what we call as an adult codependency, which again goes into there's no sense of self, and that's why so many relationships are so difficult. So in what you're going towards of understanding that co-regulation, which means having someone in your life that can regulate your life experience and your emotions with you. Co-regulation is a biological imperative. Being able to walk into this church and regulate with y'all my past experience and my church hurt is how we get to another level of safety, and that's how you increase your window of tolerance. So if I don't know what's happening to me, or I think what's happened to me is okay, then I will stay right where I am. And again, that's the old story, and we really are called into a new story. And so that's what we're looking for, right? New creation, new story, new understanding of self. And the only way to do that is to really know what I feel about something. And I hate feelings. I want y'all to know that. I am feeling repressed. My wife is feeling led. But really knowing what's the emotion, what's the life experience, what's the physiological reaction, all those are clues so you can actually be present in what you're experiencing so that we can stop these narratives of people who are being incredibly victimized.
So just to kind of make some connections or draw some through lines, in both of y'all's stories and kind of talking about the way your experiences and expertise are overlapping, there's this idea of Tommy and I actually talked about it last year around this time. This idea of normativity, and there's these expectations. Oftentimes we attribute them to God. This is the way God designed it. Sometimes we attribute them to nature. That's just natural and things like that. But oftentimes we run into lids or obstacles when the way that we can identify or recognize or see ourselves up against this normative backdrop or this normative expectation. And some of what navigating or tolerating the tensions between our differences looks like, or the degree to which we can do that is often dependent on, to kind of use Kim's story in Kim's language, how readily we can hide within the expectations of normativity. And so there are certain ways that I can hide very, very easily, and the two of you cannot. And then there's other ways that Kim and I can hide easily and Tommy cannot. In kind of a weird reversal, sometimes at Watershed, there's weird ways when the two of them can hide and I cannot. It's kind of the experience in our
We're breaking it.
Yeah. But But regardless of what sort of like liberation or emancipation looks like in that, transgressing those norms, undermining those norms, which I would call is almost always a good thing, it is experienced traumatically often. And so some of the tools that Kim and Tommy are talking about are really crucial when it comes to just having a level of self-awareness in what you're feeling spiritually, bodily, emotionally, and stuff like that, as we kind of go through some of these seasons or steps of liberation or emancipation. Just because something is good and emancipatory doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. And so having tools like this is crucial. One tool, perhaps, that might help us answer the question of when we're in this window of tolerance, what does it look like? What are some things that might like throw us off or kind of disrupt what might be an attempt at kind of equilibrium there? Right.
Yeah. So Julie and John Gottman, doctors Julie and John Gottman, have made marriage a science. And if you haven't watched their videos on YouTube or researched them, please do. They've done an excellent job. Like, it's true research. And one of the things they came up with was called the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. That means if you are participating in these 4 communication styles, you're beyond your window of tolerance, you're beyond your place of being grounded, being centered, being able to be adult and connected to yourself. And when that happens, you're going to go into a shame and blame communication style. And in that communication style, those 4, again, it's just about protection, and either we protect or we connect. You can't do both. So in these 4 styles, you're just protecting, and we're actually wired by God for connection. We're at our best when we're connected. So 2 teenagers don't resolve a whole lot of things, right? Yeah, we got some witnesses to that. So you have to be adult. So when you go in these 4 communication styles, there's no adulting that's happening. You're not in ventral vagal. You're not in your window of tolerance. And so one is criticism, which obviously is a byproduct of shame. And one is defensiveness, contempt, which is the worst one of all. And the 4th is stonewalling. So it really is just about, it becomes about, you did this, you did that to me. It's defending what's happening. It is contempt, it's eye rolling. It's very much intentionally stabbing, trying to hurt someone. And it's also, the last one, stonewalling, means it's absolute, the silent treatment. So people get into this when they don't actually know how to repair the rupture. So rupture and repair are crucial to any relationship that you're in. My wife, Larissa, and I made a commitment to each other that any rupture we would process and we would repair. And repair means to move forward differently. So it's not just of like, okay, yeah, I'm sorry. No, it's an intentionality to check into your body, what's happening, what's causing it. And so it's a conversation around it so that there's a true repair. And in that, again, that's the co-regulation of the experience that allows people to connect. And that's part of also being in the greater good of being a part of the queer community, being part of a church community, and so that we can continue to deal with these horrific things that are happening to so many people. So repair and rupture are very important things to understand, and understand these 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and understanding the antidote of each one of these. It really, really help any relationship that you're in.
I just think, with the theme of queer love and how the queer body always sort of represents this rupture and normativity, it's really difficult to show up in relationship to ourselves. So the pictures that you saw earlier, my partner and I, we've been together for about five years now. Those are the first time that we've ever had couples pictures together, right? Because it felt weird and yucky sort of in my body. Also, shout out to Joel and Hannah Watanabe of this community for taking those pictures. But as I've gone on my own healing journey, as I've recognized the connection that these things happen to our body, they affect our mental psyche, and that we are one body, right? That my mental health equates also to my spiritual health. And we've lived in a society that's tried to extract those things from one another. And Audre Lorde just really captures this really beautifully in her essay on the erotic. And our minds probably go to the erotic as sexual, but in it, she's really doing a social analysis where the erotic is creative power. She says, the erotic functions for me in several ways, and the first is in providing the power which comes from sharing deeply any pursuit with another person. The sharing of joy where the physical, emotional, psychic, or intellectual forms a bridge between the sharers, which can be the basis for understanding much of what is not shared between them and lessens the threat of their difference. And so it's in that recognition that I'm coming into relationships traumatized and triggered. Mm-hmm. And that the other person is coming into relationships traumatized and triggered, or other people for those who are non-monogamous. Mm-hmm. Your spirituality is important too. But one of the scriptures that really helps me in this, that I've always found solace in and sort of connects to the Allgood part of how I present into the world, is found at James 1:2-4. And there James says, "Consider it all joy, my siblings," the Tommy version, "whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that this testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything." And so what are our bodies, what are we giving them the permission to disrupt? And I think that when we choose connection, we are stepping into our power, our creative power. You mentioned earlier that 1 + 1, or 2 become 1, right? I heard earlier it said it's not that 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 1 = 3. There's a new creation when we join ourselves and our love together.
So just as we're kind of rounding into the home stretch of this portion of our time together, before I kind of introduce how I want us to kind of land the plane, just a little housekeeping thing real quick. Many of you probably showed up, maybe, like I said, you saw the social media, kind of saying, hey, this is going to be, the queer one, or you heard us talking about it in the weeks leading up. And the reality is conversations around queer identity, queer love, queer liberation, and things like that certainly can't be thoroughly navigated in the space of about 35, 40 minutes. And so with some acknowledgement of that and kind of knowing that many of you maybe showed up with particular questions, particular things that you are wrestling with in your own experiences, in your own identity, and things like that, what we're going to be doing here in a moment is the three of us are going to wrap up here shortly. The band is going to sing a song, as they're apt to do. And then we are going to dismiss and invite back. And so what that's going to look like is y'all will leave. If you got kids, please go pick them up. And then if you're gonna kind of get on with your day, your Super Bowl prep or whatever that looks like, go crazy. But if you want, after about 15 or so minutes, you're invited back in. There will be light refreshments, and emphasis on the word light because we want y'all to have room for like Super Bowl parties later. And it was really hard to procure food on Super Bowl Sunday, it turns out. We tried. So light refreshments. There will be childcare available, but you have to actually pick up your kids first and then check them back in if you want that. And then we're going to stick around for about 45 to 60 minutes to do a Q&A. And then my phone number, which I'm always trying to hand out liberally, will be on the screen. And you can text in questions for us to answer really about anything. But in our final 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll let you two speak into this, a word that sort of kind of kicked off our conversation and was generative as we were preparing for this was the word wholeness. And I think that's a word that's really iterative, really important sort of at the intersection of spirituality and mental health. So almost by way of closing statements, and maybe we'll have opportunity to talk about this more in the Q&A, but where does this idea of wholeness show up for y'all in part of this broader conversation?
Thanks, David. So wholeness is so important. It's about being a whole person. It's about being whole-brained. And so what's important for me is just an understanding of how important our emotional maturity and our spiritual fulfillment. They were always equal. They will never surpass each other. And knowing your emotional needs, knowing they deserve to be fulfilled, and part of that goes back into of understanding of know who you are. One of the worst messages I think we give in the Christian world is deny yourself, don't connect to yourself in any way. And then we say, God hates divorce. Because that's going to lead to divorce. You have to show up as yourself. You have a right, you're worthy of knowing who you are, of being able to see yourself the way God sees you. And so I think it's important to have your personal story, know it and embrace it. And have a partner that also knows their personal story. We have a graph we can put up real quick. Because part of what happens, because I have an understanding of personal self, my wife and I can have an interpersonal connection. We don't let discrimination, we don't let our past wounds interfere with that. We have power and victory over that. And in that personal interaction, we're able to go transpersonal. What transpersonal is that when you go beyond your identity and you go into identity with God, it's a super consciousness. And then in that, it goes back to personal, and then it goes back to interpersonal. And then we can worship together. My wife and I do spiritual practices together. We do all these things. So there is connection. We are aware of what threatens, the threats of judgment, the threats of rejection that come in to disconnect us. And that we will never let win, because we know that we're meant to be interlocked. And in that, we're allowed to be transpersonal and have a beautiful experience with a God who has never talked to me the way I've talked to me. And for that, I'm grateful.
So for me in wholeness, I'm reminded that as inside, so is outside. And for so long, I've been trying to separate those inside pieces and parts of myself. And it's been really hard because it's impossible to do. And then I locate that in sort of the narrative of the founding of this country, where we find ourselves with the question, who gets to be human? That's how this country started, with that question, who gets to be human? And so for me, wholeness is saying all of us do, and living into that daily, saying that my relationship is beautiful, my sex is beautiful, the erotic, the creative energy that flows in me and out of me is beautiful, that God didn't create me to operate in pieces, but to show up fully as my whole self. And it is disruptive, and yet it is beautiful. It is all good.